When the Portuguese explorers arrived along the east coast of Africa, they found the shore from Sofala in present-day Mozambique to Somalia occupied by a chain of Arab Swahili settlements, strongly Africanized by centuries of contact with the Bantu-speaking people. They traded with the Africans who brought gold and ivory from the hinterland. They were at first cautious about their interest in slaves. The Portuguese almost at once identified Sofala with the gold-rich biblical land of Ophir. They built the fortress along this coast in 1505 with the intent on monopolizing trade. In order to accomplish this, the Portuguese first tried to bypass the Arabs and the large number of Swahili-speaking people and deal directly with the Africans. Fortunately for the Portuguese, their arrival in East Africa occurred during a time when intertribal rivalries prevailed. Some of the great city-states along the coast were in decline. A number of powerful trading families were torn apart by internal disputes. Later, when the first strategy proved inadequate, the Portuguese took full advantage of this lack of unity to gain a great measure of control. They supported the sultans of Malindi against the most powerful rulers of Mombasa in the 16th century, and in the next century they helped the princes of Faza, another of the coastal city-states, against their pet Apata neighbors. The main effect of the Portuguese on East Africa was destructive and negative. They built forts, churches, and homes for themselves, while literally declaring war on all local institutions. But they could not govern the coast after the East Africans had turned against them. The traditional rulers still controlled the city-states, and it was largely a matter of political expediency that some of them acknowledged the sovereignty of the Portuguese. The external Muslim powers, such as the Turks and the Ottoman Arabs, did not even go that far. What can be said of the Portuguese can also be said with a varying degree of all East African invaders. East Africa, more than any other part of Africa, was preyed upon by one invader after the other for well over 1,000 years. All these invaders took more from East Africa than they gave. The modern history of East Africa is the history of the people trying to recover from the after effects of invaders and build or rebuild indigenous institutions. At the beginning of the 18th century, Portuguese pressure was lessened, but not out of any benevolence. The Portuguese were in serious trouble in other areas of the world, and they did not have the forces that were necessary to maintain their old power connections in East Africa. The divide and rule tactics that had worked so well from them in the early years of the expansion were no longer dependable. Some of their puppets now had power ambitions of their own. Like in East Asia, their presence was being seriously challenged. In the New World, the original settlers of Brazil were questioning the authority of a mother country while still demanding more slaves. To the Portuguese, East Africa was only one part of their global design. They extracted both gold and slaves from the coastal states and did not try to occupy all of them. For a number of years, Mombasa Island, off the coast of modern-day Kenya, was their major stronghold in East Africa, along with their neighboring Fort Jesus. The relative security the Portuguese had known along the East Coast was first upset in 1649 by the emergence of the Ottoman leader Nasir ibn Mossi, who had a navy strong enough to challenge the Portuguese at sea. The Mombasa Chronicles record that the inhabitants of the city made an appeal to Sultan Ibn Saif, who became ruler of Oman in 1649. In 1652, vessels from the Sultan's fleet raided Zanzibar. 150 miles south, a number of Portuguese settlers, including several Augustinian fathers, were killed. As a result of a poorly planned expedition, the following year the Queen of Zanzibar was driven off the island by the Sultan forces, who joined with distant locals. A Portuguese official who was responsible for the defense on the island claimed that he rescued 400 Christians and saved them from being captured by the Arabs. For the next 40 years, the revolts against the Portuguese rule continued, mainly in the city-states. The city of Pet was in a state of perpetual revolt. In the punitive expeditions against this city, the Portuguese had the assistance of some East African communities that felt threatened by the strength and military prowess of a small and powerful trading city-state like Pet. The king of Faza, who ruled another martyrdom on the island, considered the ruling family of Pet to be his hereditary foe. In 1687, a former king of Pet crossed the Indian Ocean to the Portuguese colony of Goa and offered many concessions in exchange for assistance in his attempt to regain his throne. His most attractive offer was to allow the Portuguese to erect a church at Pet and convert Muslims and pagans without hindrance. When this king returned to Pet, escorted by a squadron of Portuguese ships, he found that an Arab fleet from the Persian seaport of Muscat had anticipated his actions and was ready to forestall him and his allies. The greater damage to the king's pride was in the discovery that his former subjects had turned against him. The Portuguese were not strong enough to fight the Arabs, nor could they protect the king. There was no choice for them but to take refuge in Mombasa. For the remainder of the 17th century, the Portuguese in East Africa would have no rest from conflict. Their African allies would fare no better.